come to Berlin today representing the magnificent city of Helena, Montana, USA. On November 7th, 2017, I was elected to serve as Helena's mayor after running against a well-respected full-term incumbent. The title of my speech today is Unity Over Fear. And the reason I chose that title, because my community decided that they would prefer to get united rather than continue with fear. Now, while Helena has served a home for me for over 25 years, my story and my wife's story will enlighten you to how my community decided that we prefer to unite than divide. We prefer to unite than to create fear. My wife's story and my story began on the western coast of Africa, in a country 3 times smaller than the state of Montana. And that's the country of Liberia. Liberia, the only country on the continent of Africa to not face colonization, is where we're from. We were born and raised there. For those of you who don't know anything about Liberia, you might know that Liberia shares an intriguing and unique history with the United States. As Liberia was established by free slaves that left from the United States and went back home to Africa. In the late 1980s, our home country, Liberia, was turned into rubble and suffered unimaginable bloodshed, chaos, and heartache caused by one of Africa's most brutal civil wars. A war that took the lives of 250,000 Liberians. When my wife and I finally came to the grim realization that we were starving and on the verge of death, we made a life-changing decision to flee Liberia, leading us to neighboring West African country of Ghana. When we got into Ghana, we were literally dying of starvation. My wife was 87 pounds, and I was 92. It was in Ghana where my wife first told me of a place called Montana. She described it as a beautiful, large, rural state where she had studied as a foreign exchange student in high school just 6 years earlier. And it was in this same country where my wife Maddie and I decided to call her host family the Knoxheims. And they also, when I told them I was coming to Berlin, they said, hey, our heritage is in Germany. Knoxheim is a German name. And it was in the same country where the Knoxheim decided to host my wife as an exchange student. They worked tirelessly to find ways to bring my wife over to Helena when we fled Liberia. They petitioned for a student visa for her to come and study nursing at Carroll College, and she was granted permission because she came as a student. I could not join her. And to make matters more complicated, 2 weeks before my wife Maddie departed for the United States, we found out she was pregnant with our daughter. I was scared, confused, and didn't want her to leave. Because not knowing where she was going, not knowing how long she was going to be there, and not knowing when I would join her, I was scared. But the grace of God and my wife's persistence reassured me that everything was going to work out. And eventually, she convinced me that this was the best opportunity for our growing family. So Maddie left and went to America so she could start over and create more opportunities for our child, which is exactly what she did. Determined to see my family again, I went through the process to seek refugee status in America, a process that took me 2 years and 7 months to go through. Finally, February 17th, 1994, I arrived in Helena, Montana. The day I was finally granted admission into the U.S., I flew straight to Helena and saw a community with open arms, ready to embrace me. When I looked into my wife's eyes for the first time in nearly 3 years, and when my almost 2-year-old daughter ran into my arms, I knew at the very moment that the road was in fact meant for us and was simply leading us home all along. My sense of purpose was restored. But even in places that feel the most like home, one should always expect to face discomfort and challenges. When Maddie and I started out in our first home, a vandal one night spray painted KKK on our wall, and they wrote, "Go back to Africa." I hadn't noticed that, but a neighbor came over and knocked on my door. And she said, "Did you see the nasty thing written on your wall?" I said, "No." She said, "Come outside and look at it." I went outside and saw the racist graffiti, and I decided I would call the police. By the time the police got to the site, my home, my neighbors had gotten together to wash my wall down. My neighbors believe in unity over fear. These former neighbors of mine chose not to encompass by the fear of living by a black family that would expose them the uncomfortable truth of racism, but instead they chose to stand unified against the rhetoric of intolerance and fear-mongering. Now, since arriving in Montana in 1994, many people whom I've met outside of Montana, and when we talk about Montana and tell them about this story, almost 100% of them will ask, "But what are you still doing in Montana?" And truthfully, it's a fair question. I respond by saying, I am raising my children, 2 young black children, in Montana as foreign parents. It couldn't be much easier for Maddie and me to pick up and move to the coast where there is much more diversity. But after what I've experienced and what other families have endured, my simple answer to the question is community. My community got with me to dispel the notion that the community was more interested in fear instead of unity. So with that community, I decided I'm going to be with you. Community is what kept Maddie and I close to the state that initially took us in as one of their own. And while our 2 children, Jamie and Bliss, have both moved away to pursue career goals, I imagine that Montana will always be home for them as well. Community is what led to me, along with my wife and daughter, to all take the oath to serve and protect the United States Armed Forces. The authentic and genuine spirit of a community is what can propel a skinny refugee from West Africa to get involved in as many civic groups as possible and one day become the mayor of the capital city of the least black state in America. A community is more than just what you can find in common, with your neighbors, but also about what you can learn from them and how they react to the experiences that are unique and difficult to you. I'm not naive to the fact that racism, bigotry, and prejudice in its all form exists everywhere, anywhere you go. But how your neighbors and how your community respond, that's what makes the difference. But as history indicates time and time again, the functioning aspects of the norms of society and civility are fragile, and no community anywhere in the world is immune from the growing divisiveness that seeps into our towns, regions, and countries. It is not too difficult to understand where disunity and civil unrest originate from. We as human beings share differences among one another that are so simple to focus on. Differences like where we come from, what we look like, how we pray, who we love. While we should treasure and learn from culture and social differences that surround us, we must also be mindful about what our differences can fuel in civilization, where leaders seek to divide populations for power, economic purposes, and other ulterior motives. The fact of the matter is, corrupt leadership throughout history has taken its toll in almost every corner of this world. From my country of birth to the country I swore to serve and protect, and even right here in our respected ally country of Germany. What always gives me hope in times of despair is what my story, like so many others, embody, and that is the power of when ordinary people come together to organize and accomplish extraordinary things. The world witnessed this collective power when men and women from Berlin, Hungary, Poland organized to revolt and protested the idea of a war meant to promote fear and division. They charted a new pathway forward for future generations that inspired the global citizens of today to seek unity and peace throughout not only West and East Germany, but throughout the world, proving that the strings necessary to sew together a commonwealth are not woven in fear, but by the nature of indivisibility and unity. Unity over fear. For leaders and public officials all around the world, including the United States, there is a lesson to be learned from the commemoration of the fall of the wall. We are stronger against evil of terror, corruption, greed, power. When we tear down walls, we build bridges to a relationship that outlasts the hands of time. When we embrace unity, we do not allow ourselves to be subdued by fear. We are ensuring a better world for the next generation. The voices of the present will guide the ears of the future. And it is time to speak up for a new vision that promotes global peace and partnership to take on our toughest challenges, like climate disaster that will displace millions of people over the course of the next decades. Clean water sources and food supply are growing more and more scarce as we turn a blind eye to the threat of global warming. Poverty and starvation weakens population even in regions of great wealth and prosperity. We should be working together on a global front to ensure that the most vulnerable among us not only have the opportunity for upward mobility, but also have a seat at the table when implementing policies aimed at creating a more equal and fairer world. Speaking of a fairer world, it's time to put an end to the global pay equity gap that shortchanges hardworking women of all backgrounds doing the same work as men. As we move forward, progressing into a world with more opportunities for the marginalized, we all need to work together to kick down the wall of toxic patriarchy and invest in the empowerment of women leadership roles, both in the public and private sector. The time is now. So let me understand the gravity of the movement we are in. A movement that allows us to deeply and thoroughly reflect on the progress we've made here in Berlin and around the world. Let us utilize the commemoration of the fall of the wall not to celebrate, but to inspire a new wave of activism powered by organizing of ordinary people who choose to be motivated by the possibilities of unity and not the easy undertaking of fear. I want to challenge you. Let us utilize the commemoration of the fall of the wall, not only to celebrate, but to inspire a new wave of activism powered by organizing of ordinary people who choose to be motivated by the possibilities of unity and not the easy undertaking of fear. Thank you all for having me. God bless you. And may the winds of forever be at your back, now and forever. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your story. And this was truly inspiring.
Thank you.
So I would like to, if the audience have any questions on the topic of this discussion. Also, since we are finishing up the day now, we can also have concluding remarks.
I just want to say thank you so much for, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, and your wife's story was very beautiful. I have a question about unity because I recently was made aware that I'm from the U.S., that within the Black community in the U.S. there is a divide between African immigrants and the descendants of slaves, and I was wondering if you had any thoughts of that, or how the Black community could kind of unite and overcome those differences?
From my experience, I don't think there's a disconnect. There are always people who would create the disconnect and hoping that it will flourish. I don't think there may be cultural differences that we don't understand each other at the time, but the disconnect are created by people who want to bring about the disunity. And I've toured the United States of America, and I've been almost everywhere in various communities, and I see that we are working together. There may be cultural differences that the African Americans may not understand about Africans that have migrated to the United States, but I think it's just, we will always be faced with those parties that want to tear us apart rather than bring us together. Thank Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Oti. I'm also from Ghana.
Atisen,
Mehoye.
Beuye.
And recently I'm staying in South Africa. I'm working in South Africa.
Okay.
And when I talk of South Africa, and I hope that many of you who know of South Africa will know of xenophobic issues. I don't know if you'll be able to help the situation that you also faced way back in US and how certain can also be implemented in South Africa to help the situation. The situation in South Africa is that I'm a teacher there. Mm-hmm. The colleague teachers see you as taking their job. Even though you are working, they appreciate the way you work with them, but still other people will see you as you have taken their job. If not for you, maybe they would have been doing what you are doing. So how were you able to go contain the situation so that I'll be able to implement it? Thank you very much.
Thanks for the question. And that's a very important question because I know we face similar stuff in the United States where people think that immigrants are coming to take the jobs of regular Americans, and that could not be further from the truth. But I also always admonish immigrants and Africans, and I always tell them, you know, sometimes when we migrate from one place to the other, I remind myself I must have thick skin. Instead of just accepting everything as status quo, we must move one step further. And when I say that, what I mean is that people might not understand you. And it is left with you to tell your story. It is left with you to let them know that, no, this is not what we're doing. Because people always, they tend to want to look at the negatives. And they refuse to look at the positive you bring, the positive I bring, the positive other immigrant brings. And it's left with you to continue to tell them that. Because it's easy to say, oh, I'm not working because Mr. Collins took my job. And then I come back and say, you know, I have 3. Do you want one of them? And I will be glad to turn it over because I didn't get it by standing up and waiting for someone to give it to me. I applied like every other person. I interviewed like every other person, just like you. And so sometimes we have to explain to them that, you know, this is what we did. We saw, we applied, we interviewed, and we got accepted. You can also do the same. As a matter of fact, you have the advantage over me as a citizen, someone who was born here. So you have to tell your story. And that's how I've been able to do it, but I've always been able to look at the positive side of the equation. Like people say, why are you still living in Montana when the people treated you like that? I turn it around and say, but nobody can tell me their neighbors washed their walls down, even though they were treated that way. So look for the positive in things and not always the negative. And you must have thick skin. Because sometimes it's not to be mean, it's not to be derogatory, they just don't know.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I want to congratulate you on your new election. Speaking as a fellow West African, I know the Liberian community very well. And I've been going to Liberia since the end of the civil war there. There's a lot of devastation there.
Yes.
And now my question is, how do you intend to use your position to help the Liberian community to recover, and particularly in the area of reconciliation, because it's still a major problem down there?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Like I told the gentleman who lives in South Africa from Ghana, we need to be able to stand up to the plate and tell our story. Now, I am the mayor of the capital of Montana. I can do so much and no more. Since becoming mayor, I've been to almost the 50 states, talking to Liberians in those states of what we must do in order to minimize corruption in Liberia and to be able to reconcile with each other. I've made that a duty of mine. Liberians here are very passionate about developing the country. And so they send a lot of money, they try to work with people in Liberia to develop the country. And I also tell them, one way you could do that, and everybody will see the value in it, is we need to collaborate with the government. Everybody's doing their little part, and it's not being noticed, it's not being seen, because I go into my village and I build a well for my villagers. The rest of Liberia don't know that. The Liberian government does not know that. So what we need to start doing, if I'm to build a basketball court in Monrovia, let's get the Liberian government involved also. If it costs $100, I'll provide $60. Let the Liberian government provide $40 to add value to that, to have a sense of purpose. Because if they can contribute to it, they will see it rather than just hand out. And that's what I've done, and I will continue to do that in my weak way as mayor of Helena. Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation. And I just wondering what is really happening with we Africans. That's the problem. I think I have to put some comments. The previous presenter said like the Europe or European Union, they cannot solve the problem of the border between Russia and Ukraine. What they can do is just to tell them what they have to sign in order to comply with European treaties. Now it comes to my knowledge that the main problem for African countries is thinking about there is someone from outside of Africa will come to solve their problems. That is the problem. And that's why I was listening to my fellow guy from Ghana who is working in South Africa. And I remember by then xenophobia happened in South Africa. I was there. And what I experienced exactly is not really about job, it's about ignorance of telling our true story.
Yes.
We are brothers from the same continent, but we forget our cultural background. That's where our problem starts. I think the only solution to all of these problems, we have to start with our mindset. We always talk about what we can see, but we have to invest more in softy way. Education system, policy making, and a lot of things which can change first our approach to problem solving. We cannot just say, this is the job. This job was supposed to be mine. But they don't think that this job can be acquired through certain experiences and opportunity, which you can create by yourself. No one is going to create that opportunity for you. You are the one going to do it. Another issue is about you tried to answer his question in a very diplomatic way, but maybe we have to ask ourselves, and our fellow guy from Ghana, what is the real problem for South African when he went there to look for a job? Was there any kind of, what can I say? It's just like going abroad, looking for a job, and what happens is like some foreigners, they can accept any kind of job, but for the South African themselves, they think some other jobs, they don't deserve to do it. They are just low-class jobs. So when the foreigners comes, they can take any job at any payment, but the South Africa themselves, they think they deserve more payment compared to this foreigner. That's where another problem starts. They found themselves all the jobs, they are gone by foreigners, and they remain just complaining. This complaining mentality starts from the same point, our mentality and our mindset. Okay. We need to work on this issue before thinking about the big picture. Thank you very much.
Thanks for those comments. And I agree with you to an extent, because I also believe that charity begins at home. And like you said, and I've also said, we need to change our mindset now. And like the Reverend that visited Liberia on many occasions talks about how the country has been devastated. But the problem with that is we have remained in that state of devastation, and we refuse to get away from it. And that's the problem. Look, I'll give you another example of when I first went to Montana, even though I had a bachelor's degree in political science and sociology, the first job I saw in the local newspaper was a janitor, and I applied, and I got accepted to work as a janitor at an elementary school. And every evening, I'll go to the school and clean the school out. And after a few months, one of the teachers was going on maternity leave. And I went to the principal and said, hey, can I apply for her job while she's gone? And the principal said, do you have the qualifications? I said, yes. In Liberia, I was a teacher at a middle school, and I do have the qualifications. She says, apply. And I applied. So from a janitor at that school, I took the next step and started teaching at the same school. We can do that, but we have to be able to tell our own story. And we have to be motivated enough to make that change. And that's why I would say, is there any other questions before I finalize my stuff? If there isn't any other question, I still say, let us utilize the commemoration of the fall of the wall not to celebrate, but to inspire a new wave of activism powered by organizing ordinary people like us who choose to be motivated by the possibilities of unity and not by the easy undertaking of fears. That's what I'll leave with you tonight. But I agree with you to a point. Thank you.